said that they'll work with the city to explore this as a strategy for meeting the arena. And the fourth strategy is to provide incentives for future affordable liveaboards where there's capacity for new liveaboards. So there are 2 marinas in the city that have additional capacity for liveaboards, an additional 22 liveaboards. And under this approach, the city would provide incentives to encourage marinas to offer the remainder of their liveaboard slips for low and moderate income households. And the 3 different approaches, again, the heavy approach would be to provide strong incentives for liveaboards to be affordable to lower income households. So this is how the numbers might work out. Under the status quo, all of the liveaboards could go to the moderate income households. Under the medium approach, there would be incentives to encourage a more even split of very low, and moderate income liveaboards. And under a heavy approach, there'd be stronger incentives to encourage the liveaboards to meet the needs of very low and low income residents. And this is another unique strategy to Sausalito. There aren't many communities that do have liveaboards, but HCD has indicated some willingness to work with the city on this. So the 5th strategy that the city is considering is to potentially increase the allowed density on some residential and mixed-use sites to provide for opportunities for higher density housing. So the site's inventory can include sites that will be made available during the housing element planning period through rezonings. So under the existing zoning, we show that there's capacity for above moderate income households, but based on the existing zoning, there's no capacity to meet, to provide higher density for potentially moderate or lower income households. And the law says that if there's a shortfall of sites, the housing element has to include what's called an adequate sites program to accommodate 100% of that shortfall. So after you've done all the math and adding up your strategies, if you still can't meet your regional housing needs, you can meet this through a program to rezone a certain number of acres within the city to allow a certain number of high-density units. There are some certain requirements that are tied to the rezoning of a site. If you have a program in your housing element to rezone sites, there are some strict requirements that say housing must be allowed by right. So it has to be just an administrative process, not a discretionary approval process. The site has to allow at least 20 units per acre, so that's the minimum density threshold. And the site has to be large enough to accommodate at least 16 units. So it has to be a certain size to be able to theoretically accommodate, say, a multifamily development. And at least 50% of your remaining need has to be accommodated on exclusively residential sites. And what this means is you can accommodate up to 50% of your lower income need on mixed use sites, but you can't rely too heavily on that strategy. You do have to have some sites that are exclusively higher density residential. So under this approach, the city is looking at certain sites to increase the density to the R3, the multifamily residential, to allow an increased density on these sites, and to potentially apply an affordable housing overlay district to the sites to provide incentives for affordable housing to be built. And I'm gonna, Lily's gonna walk you through each of these sites. She's more familiar with the city and the particulars of each site, so I'm gonna pass the mic over to Lily.
Can I ask a quick question? Is the city also looking at the other 50% through the multi-use path? You said it could move this section 5, either through this or through multi-use. Are we looking at both?
Can you hold that? Can you ask that question after we get to the next of our next section? It's a good question.
Great. So the first site I'll be talking about is on Woodward Avenue, and we've named this site V4. As I go through the presentation, I'll be talking about sites that are Vs and sites that are Us. The V sites are currently vacant and the U sites are underdeveloped right now, which means that there's at least a unit on them right now, but there is potential for additional units under the current zoning and then also for an upzone. So this site V4 is on Woodward Avenue. It's across from the PG&E substation on the northern end of the city. The area is currently surplus city-owned right-of-way, and it's vacant and it's relatively flat for Sausalito. The current zoning on this piece of property is R2-2.5, which is a two-family zoning district, and it allows for a maximum of 17.4 dwelling units per acre. The site that we're looking at is about a little over half an acre, and at its maximum potential under the current zoning would yield 9 units. All of those 9 units under the current zoning, the state would look at those 9 units as for above moderate income affordability. If the parcel was rezoned for a maximum of 29 units per acre, and then an affordable housing overlay district was applied over it, the site could yield up to a maximum of 25 units.
In which category? Moderate?
Well, if the affordable housing overlay district was applied to it, those units would need to be for low and moderate income levels. So it could be very low, low, and moderate.
Is that the site that was once considered to be a possibility for building a city manager's structure on?
I've heard that, yes.
That's the property.
Yes.
When you build like 25 units there, does that include parking? It's not a big street.
The parking would need to be provided on the site.
How many cars per unit do they talk when they say off-street parking?
The current regulations in Sausalito for multifamily are 1.5 parking space for 1 bedrooms or less. So if it was
For
2 bedrooms.
1 bedroom or less?
Correct. So if it's studio
So
or a
it's a
wet.
two-bedroom house and
Let
two
her
bedrooms.
answer
Yeah,
your
I know, but please,
Let her
these
answer your
questions are
question.
gonna get lost, so please just answer it. For two-bedroom place, how many parking places off-street are you talking?
2 parking spaces.
2, okay.
So the next site that I'll be talking about is V5, and it's on the end of Butte Street, on the northern end of the city. The area is currently vacant and pretty heavily forested. The current zoning on this property is R2-5, which is a 2-family zoning district, and allows for a maximum of 8.7 units per acre. The site is a little over 2 acres, and at its maximum potential under the current zoning, it could accommodate 17 units. Again, all of those units would be counted towards above moderate affordability. However, if the parcel was rezoned for a maximum of 29 dwelling units per acre, and then an affordable housing overlay district was placed on it, the site could yield a maximum of 87 units at its highest capacity. The next site is called U1, it's the Valhalla site. It's located at 201 Bridgeway and then also 206 2nd Street. It's on the southern end of the city. The 201 Bridgeway property is occupied by the Valhalla, which is a 2-story noteworthy structure and has been vacant for several years. The 206 2nd Street parcel contains an approximately 33-space parking lot and also a single-family home. The current zoning on the Valhalla site is neighborhood commercial, which is a mixed-use zoning district that allows for a maximum of 29 dwelling units per acre. The current zoning on the 206 2nd Street site is a split between neighborhood commercial and R3, which is a multifamily residential zoning district. The 2 sites combined is a little under an acre, and at its maximum potential under the current zoning, it could yield 15 units. To put those 15 units in, the existing structure wouldn't necessarily need to be removed. You could put units into the interior without demolishing the structure. Under the current zoning, also, no residential is allowed on the ground floor. Under the current zoning, all the residential needs to be above the ground floor. If the parcel was rezoned to R3 and then the Affordable Housing Overlay District was placed over it, the site could yield a maximum of 22 units. And with the zoning to the R3, the units would be allowed on the ground level. They wouldn't necessarily need to be above the ground level.
What income level would they be?
For the Affordable Housing Overlay Zone, that would be, again, a mix between very low, low, and moderate. The next site is the U3 site. This is along the block, the 1700 block of Bridgeway, pretty much in the middle of the city. The area currently contains 3 dilapidated residential structures. The current zoning on this parcel is already R3, which again is a multifamily residential zoning district. And again, it allows 29 dwelling units per acre. This site is a little under half an acre, and it's at its maximum potential. Under the current zoning, it could yield 12 units. If the Affordable Housing Overlay District was placed over it, the parcel could yield 18 units, so an additional 6 units. The next site is V2, and it's located along the 800 block of Bridgeway. The site is in between 833 and 885 Bridgeway, near downtown. The parcel is currently vacant. The current zoning on this parcel is central commercial, which is a mixed-use zoning district that allows for commercial and then also allows for residential up to a maximum of 29 dwelling units per acre. The site is about only 0.2 acres, and it's at its maximum potential under the current zoning could yield 7 units. If the parcel was rezoned to R3 and then the Affordable Housing Overlay District was placed over it, the site could yield a maximum of 10 units. As the parcel is so small, the site wouldn't yield the 16 units that the state requires in order to say that those units will be affordable to low and moderate income households. So there's an option to consider this site. However, the city would need to conduct a feasibility study to demonstrate to the state that there's a likelihood that the affordable housing could be developed on the site despite not meeting the 16-unit requirement. So this is an option that the city could consider pursuing in the future if this site is selected as a parcel for rezoning consideration. The last site in the upzoning sites is V6, which is located on Ebb-Tide at the northern end of the city. Excuse me. The site is adjacent to the residence at 330 Ebb-Tide, and the parcel is currently vacant. And the current zoning is R3, which again is multifamily for up to 29 dwelling units per acre. The site is also very small. It's about 0.17 acres, and it's at its maximum potential. It could yield 4 units on that site, if under the current zoning. If an affordable housing overlay district was applied to the parcel, the site could then yield 6 units, so 2 more units. Like the previous site, as this site is so small, the site wouldn't yield the 16 units that the state is looking for, and therefore the city could consider pursuing the feasibility study.
I'm sorry, how did you get around the 16 units,
The city would have to do a feasibility study to demonstrate to the state that the units that could be built on that site would be affordable to lower income households.
What's the cost of an average feasibility study?
I'm sorry, your question?
What's the cost of an average feasibility study?
We've not had an opportunity, yeah, it's a great question. We've not had an opportunity to explore that.
Yeah, I would think those two should just be dropped before more money is spent. Sorry.
So this is the summary table on the screen for the approaches for the upzoning strategies. The light approach and the sites that were included in the different strategies were the task force directed staff to remove some of the sites in the heavier strategies as a preference, and so that's how these broke down. So the light approach includes rezoning only V4, which is the Woodward parcel. This strategy would yield 17 units. The medium approach would be rezoning V4